welcome to the Bear Necessities. I'm Bear, and this week we're going to be making a sourdough chocolate cake with a strawberry glaze. So to get started, we actually have to get our starter going. What I have in this bowl is about a cup or 230 grams of sourdough starter. You can either use ripe or discard, doesn't really matter. What you're going for is more the flavor than the rise. To this, I'm going to add 2 cups of just all-purpose flour. You can use cake flour, but you actually need the gluten in it to feed your starter a little bit more and develop more of the flavor. Along with the flour and the starter, I'm also going to add about a cup of milk. This is also 230 grams. And the flour came out to about 250 grams. Finally, I'm adding 1 tablespoon of just granulated sugar. We're going to mix this together. It is going to be a gloppy mess, but that's okay because what you're doing is starting your flour off and getting all the sourdough flavor to mix across. So giving your cake a better taste from the beginning. You don't have to mix it too much, just until it's combined. So now we have that. I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap or a towel, depending on what you have and how you feel, and let it sit for 2 to 3 hours. I would say about 3 hours. You're not going to get much of a rise out of this, and that's fine, but you might get a little bit of expand. You're definitely not going to get any bubbles, so don't worry about that. But we're just going to put this to the side for now and move on to the next part. I'm also going to start on part of the strawberry glaze because I'm using some of it for breakfast too. So I figured, knock it out right now. In here, I have 1.5 cups of previously frozen strawberries. You can use fresh. You're going to need about 14 ounces of them to make this. And I have my handy dandy immersion blender. So we're just going to blend these down until they are a fine puree. You can use your blender, you can use a food processor. If you have to do it by hand, have fun. And it's as simple as that. Let's remove that. And this, I'm going to keep about half a cup of it for the glaze for the cake, and the rest of it is going to go into some strawberry muffins. Now, we're going to wait for our sourdough starter to sit for about 3 hours and be right back. So if you are in a kitchen that doesn't have a food processor or a blender, one of the easiest ways to hand process these instead of having to chop until your knife falls apart is to put them in a pot and put it on a very low heat, maybe medium low. Add a tablespoon or so of water and just start letting it warm up. As it warms up, it'll start to soften the fruit, and you can just use a wooden spoon or whatever spoon you use to stir in and just mash the strawberries. You'll still have little bitty chunks in there, but once it's come up to like full heat and the strawberries are really falling apart, you can take it off of there, let them sit in that for just a couple of minutes, and they'll continue to soften and stretch, and you can just continue to use that. If you have a potato masher or anything, that can also help. A fork would also break up those little chunks as well, but there is a way to do it by hand. But then you're going to have to let those strawberries cool off significantly because we need to start them off from cold because we're going to cook them again. But at least you have one way of doing it by hand. It has been about 3 hours, a little bit short of that. And like I said, you're not going to see much bubbling in your starter, but mine did expand quite a bit and it got nice and soft. I'm really excited about it. Smelling it, it has that nice tartness of a good sourdough, but you can smell a little bit of the sweetness of the flour that we added earlier because it hasn't had enough time to be fully digested by the yeast. So now we're going to continue making the rest of our cake batter. That's the word. So for this, you are going to need 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. That's about 300 grams, give or take like 4, depending. We need 1 cup or 200 grams of oil, 2 teaspoons of vanilla or vanilla paste, which is what I'll be using, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, 1 cup of cocoa. I forgot to weigh it, so surprise. And then 2 large eggs. Not going to weigh those either. What we do is we have to put all of our liquid ingredients together, mix those, and then we mix it into the sourdough batter. It's a mess if you try to do it all at the same time. You're not going to get a really great mix on it. So we need to do the liquid first. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and put our cup of oil. This is avocado oil that I'm using, but you can use any oil that you enjoy. Since this is a chocolate cake, and in my case a dark chocolate cake, using a really good, super fruity olive oil would be amazing, because olive oil and chocolate play really well together. Into the oil, I'm going to add our 1.5 cups of sugar. And that was only a cup in here. The other half was already in there because this is a small bowl. And I haven't done dishes yet, so. We're going to go ahead and crack in our 2 eggs. And then 2 teaspoons of vanilla paste. Again, you can use just regular vanilla. I'm using paste because I like the little bit of added sweetness that comes with it, and the vanilla beans themselves add a really good floral aroma and flavor. And it doesn't have to be 2 perfect teaspoons. I'm a vanilla fan, so a little bit of extra, you're not hurting anyone's feelings with that. Just put that away. And let's just give this a nice little mix just to kind of get it put together. You don't have to completely have it perfect yet. We'll get there though. But let's just break up the eggs and get the sugar kind of blended in. All right. And there we go. And it's going to be a little grainy. That's fine. Not going to hurt anything there. And remember, in here we already have our 1 cup of starter, our 2 cups of flour, all-purpose. You can use cake, but again, you need that little bit of extra gluten, so I would suggest using all-purpose, but not bread. That's going to make it too chewy. And then also 1 cup of milk, which is about 230 grams if you go by weight. This is a cup of dark chocolate cocoa. I just really like the dark chocolate cocoa. It has a nice toasty flavor to it. It almost has a smoky flavor to it just from the extra toasting of the cocoa beans. We're going to get that in there. And have no fears, this is a very thick batter that you're creating. So don't worry, you have done it correctly no matter what. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get this mixed into our sourdough starter base for the cake. And I'm going to be baking this in a bundt pan. I'm going to have to grab that because I forgot to during the commercial break. 3 hours wasn't long enough. Let's get all of this that we possibly can in here. There we go. All right, so now let's get this mixed together. And you want to make sure it is very thoroughly combined. And look at that gluten structure just coming up. It's snapping. That's perfect. Love that. All right, we're not going to mix the salt and baking soda in just yet, because remember, this is sourdough. It is highly acidic. The moment you put the baking soda in, it activates the first time, so you don't want it to blow up on you. This is a nonstick bundt pan, but still want to spray it because the sourdough and the amount of sugar in this will make life a little difficult. So let's give it a nice good spritz. If you have the baking spray that has flour mixed into it, even better. That stuff works wonders. I just don't use it because I didn't have it. All right, now we get to mix in our baking soda and salt. And that just takes a second to really get it incorporated. Grab a spatula. Get this off my spoon. There we go. And now we're going to transfer this over into our bundt pan. Alrighty. And now that. Let's just even it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. So here we are. It bakes normally between 30 and 40 minutes at 350 degrees. I already have my oven preheated there. So I'm just going to pop this in and start testing it at about 28 minutes just to see how close to 30 I need to get it. And then every 2 or 3 minutes after that if it needs additional time. All right, so our cake baked for 40 minutes exactly. I started testing it at about 28 and discovered that it was still kind of wet on the inside, so I let it go for an additional 8, checked it again, 2 more minutes, and it was perfect. It has a nice crust on it, and it's very, very hot. It just came out maybe 5 minutes ago. So I'm gonna let it sit in here for another 5 minutes or so, and then I'm gonna turn it out onto a cooling rack, the top up, so it can just continue cooling all the way through to be able to glaze it without the glaze just absorbing in. And for the glaze, we're going to start building. You will need, eventually, 3 cups of powdered sugar. I have a teaspoon of corn syrup in here. You're going to need a ½ cup of strawberry. And into the strawberry, we're also going to add a tablespoon of water and a tablespoon of cornstarch. And also with that, we're going to add a ¼ teaspoon of salt. Let me grab my tablespoon of water. That's all it takes. Let's get this mixed in our pan really quick. Now I'm going to put it on medium-low, and just for 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to keep stirring it until it comes up to heat and the cornstarch starts setting up inside of it. So I will be right back. All right, so that took maybe 2 minutes, and I just had it heat all the way through. You'll see the cornstarch, it clouds it up, and once it starts clearing up and looking more like it's just the fruit in there, and it's thick and kind of, think really soft pudding texture, that's about where you want it to be. You don't want to overset the cornstarch. Okay, we're going to transfer this over into our 3 cups of confectioner sugar and just mix it all together. Now this is a glaze, so it is going to have a slight liquid set to it. That's what you want, because once you start pouring it over the cake, it'll set up and have that nice crust. If you've ever had like a really good glazed lemon cake or something, you know what I'm talking about. And the reason I want to make this now is because we do have to cook the strawberries just a little bit. It can also go ahead and cool completely with the cake before we put the two together. Some people will go ahead and strain out the solids from the strawberries before they cook it. So you're gonna have to start with more strawberry. If you do that, it'll be that nice clear glaze. You won't have any seeds, you won't have any pulp. Personally, I like having the seeds and pulp. I think they're really pretty, but that's me. So you can choose. But you will have to start with more because you do need that half cup of strawberry to start with. Perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and let these rest. I'm going to transfer the cake out onto a cooling rack, and I'm gonna let the cake set at room temperature for at least the next hour, if not longer. So I'll see y'all back in just a little bit. So now it is completely room temperature, which is fantastic. And oh my gosh, my house smells like just the best chocolate ever. And then our glaze also set up really nicely. Still a little liquid because I had it covered in plastic so it didn't dry out. And it also smells really good. So we're gonna go ahead and get our cake onto a plate of some sort. I have this little cake stand that I always forget exists, so I'm going to use it. All right, so now we're just gonna get some of the glaze. And I'm not going to cover it 100%, but I do want it to drape over it fairly well. So let's just get a little bit more in some of these spots that are kind of sparse. There we go. Gorgeous. So now we have our pretty little cake here. We have to let the glaze dry, otherwise it's going to be a mess, but it'll make that nice crust glaze over it like a good donut. I really hope you enjoy making this cake as much as I do. It is the perfect level of sweet. It's not overly sweet. And then you add the glaze, and that's where it gets you. But it's that great summer treat. It's not a heavy cake, which is fantastic. As you see, it rose a really, really large amount. Like we got another 2.5 inches of rise off of this cake. As always, I just want to remind you that things don't have to be perfect. They don't have to always turn out the way you think they should. It's still going to be good. Not everything is meant to be perfect. It shouldn't be. That's too lofty a goal for us, and it's too stressful. Take your time with it. Make something beautiful. And remember that imperfection is where our hearts lie. It's where we fly. It's where we live. Until I see you next week, bye.